Hi, Insiders. It's Daniel Pickett from ActionFigureInsider.com, and I have the privilege of talking to my old friend Brian Flynn of Super 7. All of us locked in our house in quarantine. We're both in California. I'm in Southern California. He's in Northern California, which has been kind of a hot zone, and we have no idea when we'll be returning to work, our normal life, or anything like that. So in the midst of this, we at Action Figure Insider are celebrating our 15th anniversary. And so we kind of wanted to have some conversations with our old friends, just get to know them a little better and just kind of see how they're doing in this unprecedented time. So, Brian, let's start with that. How are you doing?
Doing surprisingly all right. I am not actually technically locked in the house. As you can tell, I am outside of the house. So you will hear the random, garbage truck or something. But we are locked in our thing. I also want to say 15 years, congratulations. I think sometimes that gets lost on people how long that actually is.
Right.
It's not a little bit of time. It's a long time. And to do something for that long with that much dedication is really, really, it's a testament to you guys, but it's also incredibly important. As a random aside, which I've already gone off topic here, we
That's
aren't
all
even
right.
one question
There's
in,
no
and we're
topic.
already off topic. It's one of those things, like still today, there's so many people that come up to me and talk to me about what an impact the magazine made for them.
Right.
And we quit making that magazine 8-9 years ago at this point. So these kind of things, while in the day-to-day sometimes they don't feel like they're having quite as big of an impact as you might think. I think the resonance over time, the impression that you get, leaves a much bigger mark than you guys might be willing to acknowledge that you have. So I just want to say thank you for 15 years of working on all this stuff, because you'd
Thank you.
be surprised how much it makes a difference, even though it's not as obvious as it could be.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been in it long enough where, like when I show up at Toy Fair, there'll be guys that show up in the press room and like, oh, I do this now because I used to read you when I was a kid. Like, I loved your site. It's just like, oh, I never thought I'd be that guy. Yeah.
You're like, I'm not that old, am I?
Right. So that's a little strange. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the secret origins of you and Super 7.
The secret origins, huh?
Yeah, so you kicked it off with a magazine. You had this entirely different career where you were doing like design work, right?
No, I mean, you could theoretically say that it's still probably part of that. So if we do the wavy lines now across the screen, where we do
Yes.
the way back thing, if you go way back to it, and we do the 10-second origin version of this, which is, I just grew up as a punk rock skateboarder, and I always drew pictures, but I didn't have any delusions I was going to be a painter, but I had no idea what I was going to do. By proxy of that, though, growing up in those subcultures, one of the things that I did a lot of was I made zines for my, with my friends. I would help them make their demo tape covers or their record covers, work on skateboard, local little skateboard graphics, or make a T-shirt or something. But at that time, if you're talking about the mid 80s, the concept that was a profession, that drawing logos and graphics was graphic design, was completely foreign to me, and I think, quite honestly, opaque to most of the world. And it wasn't actually till I went to college, I was like, I don't know, I guess I'll enroll in art classes. And my grandmother, who was an art teacher, was like, you should take commercial art classes so you have something to fall back on. And then I got into my first class of commercial art, and they were like, okay, this is, you could create, here's how you draw a logo. Here's how you do that. I was like, oh, wait, like, so drawing skateboard graphics and making record covers and magazines is a job? Oh, well, I already know how to do this. I spent my summers working at Kinko's and Xerox, like making things for people. Like, I just thought it was fun, paste up stuff. I didn't realize that was something that could become a good job. And then, so once I realized that that's what I was already doing, then it was like easy to just turn that switch and go, oh, now it's design. So I graduated, when I graduated, I got a job at Fossil Watches. I was employee number 7 in their art department.
Wow.
So when they were just starting out, and I left 15 months later, and there were 40 people in their art department. And I left there and went to Nike, and I worked at Nike for 5 years in apparel design, a little bit of footwear, and then I mostly built Nike Towns at the end. So I was doing environmental, like building the shapes and rooms inside the building, building the furnitures and displays, the three-dimensional objects, as well as doing all the branding and graphics within that. And in 2000, we left and moved to San Francisco. And that's when I opened my own design studio and retained Nike as a client. And then on the side, what happened first was a guy by the name of Jimbo Madison was working with Chronicle. And Jimbo is most well known. He worked at an ad agency, but he was the guy that did the Sega sound.
Okay, yes.
So if you ever heard that commercial, he goes, Sega! That was Jimbo.
Okay.
And Jimbo had an idea for a book that he put out on Chronicle called So Crazy Japanese Toys, which you can look up. And it's a visual survey of Japanese toys with no rhyme or reason, except these things look wacky. And he put together that book, but Jimbo had only a few toys. And so he contacted me and Mark Nagata mostly to get toys for the book. And we all lived in San Francisco. So we all sort of put the book together. Jimbo did the art direction. Jimbo put it out. And then the book did all right. And Chronicle immediately wanted a So Crazy Japanese Toys 2. Jimbo wasn't really that into it. And I was like, there's no way in hell I'm doing a book right now. I don't have the time or bandwidth for that. But I kind of came back and said, well, what I am interested in possibly doing is I would do a zine, which was, what I did before. I was like, I can put together and I can do a magazine or a zine, how I was thinking about it as a zine, but I can't deal with it. Like I can design it, I can write it, I can photograph it, I can put it together, but all the things that go along with making a magazine, I don't have time. I don't have time to ship it, deal with distributors, payments, nothing like that. And it was built on two things. One was at that time, especially, so you're talking about the first issue coming out in 2001, which means we started in 2000. The internet is still very young. There is very limited information on on the internet at all. And in general, collecting vintage Japanese toys, there isn't a lot of sharing of information in Japan.
Okay.
And I'm not saying this in a weird way, but like American collectors very much, while possessive, very much view things as sort of a group effort. Like if something is weird, or you find out about a variant, you sort of tell everybody, and this is what I'm looking for, and everybody sort of shares that information. Like, oh my God, did you find out there's R5D4 with a little orange thing on the corner? I didn't know about that. And then everybody knows, and everybody goes looks for it.
Right.
Generally speaking, in Japan, it's much more solitary. And very inclusive. So like if you know about something like really rare, like the J-tail Godzilla, you don't tell anyone because you want to find it, you want to get it, you need it for your thing. It's kind of weird. So one of the things I really wanted to do with the magazine, hold on, I have to take one step back. So on the collecting side, in 91, I went home, summer of 91 in college, and I said, I want my Star Wars figures again. 1991 was right when AFN had started coming out. So it was wildly inaccurate, but, there weren't a lot of people collecting toys from the 80s.
Right.
So collecting the line of Star Wars figures took all of like a few months. And I was like, I'm done. I've got them all.
Yeah.
Because at that time, Anakin Skywalker was considered the rarest Star Wars action figure out there.
Right.
So it tells you how skewed things were.
Yeah.
And then from there, I got into Shogun Warriors, and then from there, 1991 is when Bandai put out the first modern Godzilla vinyls.
Okay.
And so I started buying those, and I was like, that threw me down the well of chasing down Japanese vinyl toys. So fast forward into 2001, it was like, I want to start I've been going to Japan. I want to start talking about all this information that's out there, but that's kind of been held as secret. Like, I don't like that. I want to put something on in an English language where you can figure it out. But at the same time, I was not expecting it to be a successful magazine.
Right.
We really approached it the same way I approached every fanzine we ever made, which was like, I can't remember the exact numbers now, but say it cost us $5,000 to print the magazine. It was like, okay, can I sell 10 ads for $250? And that's 2,500. And then if the magazines are $5 each, I need to sell 1,250 magazines. So if I can do that, no, or 750 magazines. I'm backing it up. What's 2,500? 500 magazines. There we go. So the goal was sell 500 magazines for $5 and 10 ads for $250. If we do that, we break even. We get the magazine for free.
Right.
That's the whole point. The point wasn't to make money. The point was to hopefully break even if I only lost a little bit of money, but say it cost me $500, but I got a magazine out of it. That's actually a pretty good deal. So that was the impetus to run the magazine. And then Mark wrote some of it, but I wrote, photographed, and designed most of it. And then Mark dealt with all the letters, all the fulfillment, subscriptions. He did all the dirty work around getting the magazine done. And that was sort of the impetus to how we got the magazine started. And obviously at that time you had multiple action figure magazines and other things. So they're talking about all the other stuff that we may collect. We're going to focus on the Japanese side. And we focused in on our friends that were artists and different stuff and put that in there. And that was it. It was after work sort of hobby project.
Right. But then
so that's the world's longest short answer. And so with the very first issue, we put in a coupon to buy a figure, because at that time, if you bought Hyper Hobby or Figure King in Japan, one of the incentives to buy the magazine is in the middle of the magazine, they would say, hey, we're going to have a repaint of this vinyl figure, and here's a coupon. You have to cut the coupon out of the magazine along with the purchase price and mail it in.
Right.
So, there's an OCD part of you that's like, I'm cutting the magazine. But it was an incentive to buy, and that was a pretty cool thing. So with the very first issue, we approached a couple companies that we knew of in Japan and said, hey, we'd like to make a recolor for our magazine and put the same experience, that coupon, in our magazine. So we were able to do that. And in the very first issue, we had an M1 Gorgo through Club Dai Kaiju that was repainted, and we had a bare model Godzilla that were exclusive to the magazine, and those is good. And that response was really great, because Americans that collected this sort of stuff were like, oh, cool, we get to do the exact same thing.
Right.
What happened shortly thereafter, and I can actually do this part faster, is by issue 2, then we were able to go to the vinyl manufacturers and say, here's the character we want to make and the colorway. And once again, if I oversimplify things, because generally speaking, Japanese collectors are very linear in their thought process. Like, you'll see them like, okay, this is a recolor of this thing, but it's done as the Marathon 54, or this is painted like, everything's a reference. Right. And when we went over there, one of the first things we did was like, we want Hedorah the Smog Monster, which was not a popular character in general. And we were like, I want it clear orange with yellow and red highlights. And they were like, well, why? What's the reference? We're like, there's no reference. It just looks cool. And we're going to call it Meltdown Hedorah. And what happened was where we were able to take traditional licensing forms and then take them out of reference colors and just make them in wacky, weird colors. Like, here's a Hedorah in clear green, or here's this in orange. We were just making them, a lot of these characters, based on aesthetics. Rather than vintage reference. And that's simply because for so many of these characters and so many of the people that collect the toys, we don't know the source material the same way that people in Japan do. Right. We're literally responding to the toys themselves in their physical form. So we're getting a toy. isolated from its background and saying, by itself, what do you think of these aesthetics? And we're drawn to them. So our approach to recoloring vinyls was very, very different than any other company in Japan. And so what happened because of that is that the stuff we were making became pretty popular because it was radically different looking than anything else anybody else was making.
Right.
Those recolors then led into those same companies saying, okay, well, what vinyls would you want to make? And then we started making space filler vinyls. Like, okay, they made a 2-inch, a 4-inch, a 6-inch, and a 10-inch, but they never made an 8-inch, or they made this and this, but they didn't make this. We started making collection fillers. So now we were making our own toys with them, not just recolors, but they were through another company. Those started doing well. Then we started making some of our own characters for other companies. We were able, with Secret Base, to design the Ghost Fighter, which would have been our first unique toy.
Right.
And same thing, that started doing really well. And then we turned that into then making our own vinyls in Japan. And, this is like 9 years along. And then what happened from there, in 2003, we had opened up our store in Japantown. And in 2006, we moved the store in Japantown to the bigger location. And this is about the time that Mark left. Mark had a son. He had a lot of other things going on, so he needed to take a step back. And when we remade the store, one of the things we did in the back of the store was we made this flocked wallpaper that went across the back wall that was a Victorian motif memorial to all the dead characters in Star Wars.
Right. Yes.
That was the back wall of the store. And then there's a guy in Canada by the name of Shane Turgeon, who's a big Star Wars prototype collector that was a friend of mine. He came to town and he was at the store and he's like, you should get this wallpaper licensed and you should sell it for real. And of course I'm like, yeah, right. Like, how are we going to get this thing licensed? He goes, oh, well, you should meet my friend Steve. And that's all he said. And then who he's talking about, of course, is Steve Sansweet.
Right.
Like, oh, my friend Steve. Like, to me, it's like, no, Steve Sansweet. He's written every Star Wars book there is. Like, that's not like, oh, your friend Steve. That's like, no, that's Steve. And the crown comes down, the light shines out from the back of him.
Yes.
And so we go to meet with Steve, and he works at Lucasfilm in fan relations. And he's like, this is awesome. Let me introduce you to the head of licensing. And then he sat us down with the head of licensing, this guy named Paul Southern. And Paul Southern used to be the head of licensing for International. So he got Medicom started on Kubrick's and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're showing him the stuff we make. And he goes, oh, I've seen all this stuff. I know this stuff. It's in Tokyo. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, but nobody in America makes this stuff. And I'm like, that's what we do. And he goes, oh, well, what do you want to make? And of course I go into all the typical stuff. And he's like, yeah, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that. That's all Hasbro. Like, if you can find something that's more than like 18 inches tall, that costs more than $100 or whatever, then there's a potential option. And so I immediately, same thing, I went to, how about Shogun Warriors, like 2-foot tall jumbos? Yep. And he was like, yeah, should be fine. So we ended up getting a license to make the Super Shogun Stormtrooper, because same thing, as a kid, I had Star Wars figures and I had 2-foot tall Shogun Warriors.
Yep.
But those two things didn't mix. So that was the start of the transition into being able to work sort of on a small run designer or Japanese vinyl sort of toy to American, like larger licenses and non-vinyl manufacturing. Because the thing with vinyl is that you can make lower runs, but by nature of its price and everything else like that, there's not a way to sell a lot of them.
Right.
When it's a vinyl figure for $95, there's only so many people that are willing to be like, oh yeah, I'll take that. You're not going to sell quantity of them.
Right.
So then we made the Super Shogun Stormtrooper, and that did really well, but we essentially bet the farm on that one, which was like, here's like the last 10 years of Super 7. Like, we're taking every penny and putting into the Stormtrooper, and either it's going to work or it's going to implode.
Yep.
And it worked pretty well. meaning it didn't like completely knock it out of the park, but it did everything it was supposed to do.
Yep.
And afterwards, we had some money left over, and we're like, okay, well, now we should make Boba Fett. But it was going to be like, okay, this is going to take us another 2 to 3 years to get Boba Fett done, because Shoguns are ridiculously difficult to make if you make them the way they were made back in the day. There's a reason people don't make highly complex toys out of blow molded polyethylene. They make wiffle ball bats out of it,
Right. Yes.
because it's not meant for high tolerance, precision engineering.
Yeah. And with my Shogun Warriors, I played with them till they broke down to their periodic elements. Like
Yeah.
their legs would
So,
fall off, and there was that bag of sand, black sand inside that weighted them down and stuff. Like
exactly.
there's just all
But,
that crazy stuff.
The reality is, in that regard, they have more or less forced that material to become, a high tolerance, high precision material when it's not meant to be.
Yeah.
So trying to replicate that is not the wisest decision, but it is the correct decision. So what happened is we sat down, we're like, okay, this is going to take a couple years. And we were just sort of talking about all the things we'd want to make. And one of the things I talked about was like, the thing that I would kill for is those alien prototypes that were on the cover of Tomarts.
Yeah.
Like those things are insane. And a guy that worked with us at that time, a guy named Frank Supio, was like, well, let's call Fox and find out how much it costs. And I was like, well, okay, we don't have anything. And then we started calling around through like people like Shane that we knew that were prototype collectors. And we were able to get a hard copy of the Kane pretty easily. And I was able to get half of the Alien pretty easily. So all of a sudden it was like, wait, we can maybe do this. So we got a hold of Fox. We ended up getting the license because there wasn't a whole lot of interest at that time on Alien.
Was that Josh Izzo that was he there then working on that?
I can't remember specifically if Josh gave us the very first contract or not, but he was there very shortly thereafter. And obviously Josh has been a huge cheerleader for us ever since then. And obviously a complete, absolute maniac when it comes to figures. He's amazing.
Yes.
So once we were like, oh, this might work, but it's like, we can either take the money and make Alien, or we can take the money and make Shogun. And the Shogun thing was going to be a 2 to 3 year development cycle. And Alien was going to be like a year. So I was like, well, let's try the Alien thing. Let's see if we can do that. And that's like when the first sort of reaction thing sort of happened.
Yeah.
I feel like now that's almost like a different answer and a different story, and I'm rambling, but that was how we built up to it. But so going into it, and I guess I'm assuming at this point, if you've listened to this much of this podcast or interview already, you already know who we are, because I've already rambled for 45 minutes about inanities, and Daniel's only asked one question. So I feel like you sort of know what that history is, but I would say that for those that don't or have started collecting reaction later, we went, what was that, 2015, 2014? I can't remember which year it was that we went to San Diego with the Alien prototypes.
Oh, yeah.
But we went there with an early bird kit, one, because they weren't ready, and two, with sort of the premise of like, look, the action figure market right now is heavily dominated by highly articulated, highly detailed paint app and low price point Star Wars figures that you can buy at Target for $7.99. It's the super articulated Stormtrooper had just come out and everything. And it's like, so we're going to go to San Diego with low likeness, low articulation, and unpainted, no paint app at high price point, $20 a figure. So we figured this is going to be really, really popular. No, we didn't. We really thought that we were going to be so far down the well in what we were offering that we were concerned if we could sell through what we were going to make.
Oh, my Lord.
And so we went to San Diego. We made up this whole story around the fact that they were canceled.
Right.
So what would they have done at Toy Fair in 1979? Like, oh, here's some prototypes. Like, and so we did unpainted blue, so it matched some of the Kenner unpainted color from that time frame. And we made a 2-pack box that had the Aliens logo that said Toy Fair, 1979, with a big canceled stamp across the front. And the letter inside was like, "Dear retailers, we think you'll find these new alien friends to be a wonderful, thing, And it was this whole play on what would have happened had this really gone forward. And like 2 weeks before we didn't announce it till I think 2 weeks before San Diego. And so 2 weeks beforehand, we were like hedging our bets on what we could sell, what we're going to get online, how might we get rid of these initial batches. And then once we sort of announced it, all of a sudden it was like, oh, lots of people seem very interested.
Yeah, you got
And
a lot of big press from a lot of different places.
Yeah. And I think what we didn't realize at the time is there are so many people like us that grew up on that Kenner format that while we are buying current 3 3/4, what it lacks is that sense of nostalgia and emotional connection to the past. And that's something that they were looking for. So when we went to San Diego and we released them, we sold out of everything on preview night.
I was in that line, I remember.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. Yeah, and I appreciate it. And what was interesting.
But you shut preview night down essentially. Like they came to your booth and was like, "This will not stand. You can't have this kind of line." Like they had to keep shooing people away, and they just kind of move 3 feet and then shuffle back in line.
Yeah, it was very exciting, and it was very gratifying because it was something that we cared about that we didn't know that anybody else was going to care, and then to have that many people be excited about it as well was really, really cool. At the same time, one of the things that was happening is that everybody we knew that worked at, or lots of people we didn't know that worked at every other toy company, came by to see what we were up to. And they came by on Wednesday night and congratulated us. And they came by on Thursday and talked about how cool it was. And they came by on Friday and they came by on Saturday. And so by Saturday, we were literally like, oh, look, this is really cool. This is going to do great. But we're literally 3 people at that point.
Yeah.
We're like, okay, we still haven't gotten the figures out. We have to wait till they land. We have to sell them all to make our money back. And then we can start on the next ones. We will not even be able to have a next line out a year from now. It's going to be 18 months before we can get one more line of figures out. Directly across from us is Funko. And Funko had been our booth neighbor for 7 or 8 years, back to when Mike Becker owned them.
Right, yep.
So we were really good friends with all the Funko guys. And this is literally like a month after Funko had signed a deal to get some investor backing to grow. And by Saturday, all of a sudden it was like, if we don't act on this faster, every company walking in the door to us is going to be able to take this and run with this.
Right.
So literally at that San Diego, I started talking to Brian Mariotti, who's the owner of Funko, who's a friend of ours. And I was like, hey, I think there's something here, and this may be bigger than we can handle. We're literally 3 people.
And mostly had a history of like T-shirts and vinyl,
Yeah, that's all people knew us for, because, rightly so, because that's what we've been making for 14 years.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, we're a big player in that, but that pool is this big.
Yeah.
This pool, even at this big, is something I can't really scale into. And with licensing, if anybody that knows licensing is listening to this, if you want to set up a new contract with anybody, it costs an arm and a leg to set up a new contract. You're talking about contracts starting at $25,000 to $50,000. Oh, and we haven't worked with you before. You need to pay all of it up front.
Yep.
So locking up a license is very difficult. Now, if you have an existing contract and you add an additional category, like say you have pop vinyls and you want to add 3 3/4 figures, to amend your contract sometimes is free or a very nominal fee, $500,000 for them to add the category. Very, very easy to add to an existing deal. So in that regard, Brian and I literally struck a handshake deal at San Diego Comic-Con to have him help produce and distribute our toys. And then as he talked to all of his licensors that came in, he literally walked them over to our booth and said, and I need to add that category. And so he was able to sort of protect a lot of the licenses we wanted to get to in the next few years by amending them to his contract.
Right.
And so that's how our partnership with Funko began.
Now, when you went to Fox for the Alien license, you were also, I mean, you were already looking at doing like the kind of the Burger King glasses and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, that's something else you guys didn't have a lot of past experience with either, right?
I think it was, we didn't have a license that was appropriate, and, you know, and who is our customer? So if you're a person that buys Japanese vinyl from us, you may not be looking for Burger King glasses.
Right.
If I'm talking about a kid from 1977 to 1983, 1985 buying action figures, you know, what we talked about was, oh man, if you were buying these action figures, the next thing you would do is go to Burger King and get that glass. So
Right.
that's why we went there, was like, oh, this is the perfect synergy for the two things. So it was completely new for us. But like I said, I think that we were very clearly unprepared for the level of interest that it had and the
Right.
ability to capitalize on that interest at that time. So we ended up partnering with Funko to do the deal originally was to do our production and distribution. So we would design the figures, we would design the card backs, they would produce and they would distribute. And then we would basically get a royalty back off that. And, you know, I don't know what they would get grumpy about or whatever, but like, you know, at that time, Funko was very, very big for independent toys, but as a toy company, a tadpole of what they are now.
Right.
Very, 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 very small, comparatively speaking. And that worked really great for, I would say, the first year. But, and this is not said with any malice, the reality is by a year from that time, Funko had grown so big, so fast that literally the product that we were making went from being like, oh, hey, this is a chunk of our business to this is such a minor sliver of our business, and we literally cannot keep up with the demand for pop, that the infrastructure got so big that it went from me being able to just pick up the phone and call Ben or call Reese or call Brian to like, I can't get a hold of anybody. And that's not negatively, it's the fact that they grew and became a company of their size, you know, is sort of unprecedented.
Absolutely.
I would say that if you talk to any of them, they would tell you like, we never expected it to go like it did. And so what happened was it just got to the point where literally things were moving without us to a degree. So things were happening where we weren't aware of them. That sounds negative, and I don't want it to be negative. It was a positive experience for us. But like Tomorrowland, like I didn't know Tomorrowland was coming out. And it was fine. It was the same thing. You know, I talked to Brian. He's like, look, Disney really wanted to do something. This was a place where we could do it. It was a favor to them. It's like, all right, it makes sense. It's fine. It's not a bad thing. But by nature of that relationship over time, we had less and less control of it simply because the machine that we were working with was getting so big that the personal relationships that we had with those people were no longer part of the relationship to getting the product made, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not, and I want to be very clear that it's not saying that with animosity. It's just like, holy moly, like, do you see what this company is doing? Like, I can't name another toy company that's grown like that in a long time. Like they're almost $1 billion a year in sales now.
Yeah.
That's Hasbro and Mattel world,
Right.
where a decade ago that, it's like, how do you do that? I mean, if somebody asked me if I want to get on that pop train and ride that to the bank, I would probably say yes too.
So, I mean, just thinking about the arc of, Super 7 being uh, a zine first, and then when you started getting into the manufacturing, still kind of a side project for you.
It's completely still a side project.
It's not a still side. You have multiple retail establishments, the volume of licenses you have now. I mean, you
well
as
now
a as
now
a
it's
as a
different.
skater kid growing up, I can't imagine you ever thought you were going to be the boss of like this many people.
Well, no, and that was the thing. So even into those early parts of the Funko relationship, it was still only, we had 2 retail stores, but you're still talking about a staff at that time of maybe 8, 9 people. You've got the store manager at each store, an assistant manager at each store, and then 4 years ago there were still 3 people in the office, not
Wow.
including me because I'm not working there. So it's still 7, 8 people. It's not a ton of people because a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of what you would need people do is theoretically being done on the Funko side. But in as much in that growth period, we started running into things of like, hey, these are licenses we want to make that maybe they didn't like. There's stuff that they want to make that maybe we don't like. Um, and there's a host of issues that come into any relationship, and not positive or negative. That as you grow older, quote unquote, like we're going through our teenage years at this point, and we're like, hey, we want to do this instead, and they're like, well, we don't feel confident in that. And really, one of those things was Masters of the Universe in 3 3/4. We had worked out a deal with Mattel to start working on a bunch of stuff for Masters of the Universe, starting with the first Skeletor's Lair. And the concept around that, or let me back up. The idea is I grew up on Star Wars first. And as
Right.
I got older, Masters of the Universe happened. And those things are disparate. So for me, if I was thinking about it on a development side, and they're going, okay, we need to make our own line of toys, what's something new and unique, they would have started with the predominant form factor of the time, which is 3 3/4. They were making Flash Gordon and all the other stuff in 3 3/4.
Yep.
And the premise I had is that they would have evolved that figure into what became Masters of the Universe.
Right.
So as a person that grew up on 3 3/4 first, seeing Masters of the Universe in 3 3/4 is interesting to me because it's a different take on a license that I know and I care about, but it's also done in a format that I care about something else, no different than a Stormtrooper as a Shogun Warrior.
Right.
Uh, and that was one of those that Funko was very much just like, we don't understand. It doesn't make sense to us because it's supposed to be, this big brawny thing. And I'm like, yes, it is. But as a 3 3/4 person, I want to see it in 3 3/4. So what we agreed to at that point was that we would they weren't willing to make it, but we would make it. And in doing so, those cards don't say reaction.
Right.
They say Super 7
Yeah.
because reaction was being produced and distributed by Funko, and this was not a reaction figure. And you get into that weird limbo, which is like, hey, look, this is kind of our thing, but we want to make it, but you guys don't. What are we supposed to do? Once again, neither positive nor negative. And so we started working on the master stuff, and it did pretty well. And I'm not saying that as a weird thing, and being that there were plenty of people that had the exact reaction that Funko had, which is like, I don't get this. This doesn't make sense to me. I don't like it. The whole point of Masters is for it to be big. But there was also a fair amount of people that were slightly older that were like, oh my God, I love this.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, I'm making this product for this person, not this person.
Yeah.
And as that continued to evolve and Funko continued to grow, we got to a point, and once again, not negatively, they literally just couldn't get to releasing reaction figures at a certain point because they had so much demand for a Funko Pop that I'll overstate it. Like if you have 100 artists that work for you and you need to make 200 products, you're going to pick your top 100.
Right.
Well, the top 100 do not include reaction figures. And
Right.
that's just because, hey, like they got a thing that's working. And so we got to a point where actually releases weren't coming out. And so at that point, it sort of dovetailed into we're selling a pretty good amount of Masters of the Universe on our own, products not really coming out through Funko. Like maybe we've gotten big enough to pull this back inside
Okay.
and do this for ourselves. And that's when we sort of came to an agreement with them and we pulled Reaction back to us. You know, they continued to make some 3 3/4 that they wanted to make, but
Yeah.
under the guise that it had have 9 points of articulation. That was a 9 POA line.
Yep.
Um, and they did a really great job with Batman 66 and some other stuff. And we just sort of brought it back in. And that was the point where we finally said, okay, I think we've got a business that's big enough that I can maybe switch over from running the design studio into working at Super 7. And I would say, though, that at that point, it was still very hypothetical, I guess is the right term,
Okay.
which is like, maybe this will work, but it's not. But I basically sat down with my wife, who's my partner in the design studio, and I said, I think if I spend a year really focused on this, the way I would be on our other business, which is the design studio, I can make Super 7 really turn the corner into being like, oh, okay, this is, I hate to call it a legit business because it was a legit business before,
Right.
but it was a legit business that could just afford to pay the few people that worked for it too. Like, I think we can turn the corner and really make this a real functioning thing. And quite honestly, because development timeline's about a year, once that year passed, like that's when all of a sudden things started to really pick up where you're like, oh wait, these guys are making moves, like this is working now.
Yeah.
And it was just a matter of like, at that point is like, it just needed that little bit of extra attention to push it over the edge. And after a year, it was a place where it's like, okay, now I can work at Super 7 and
Okay.
not at the design studio.
Yeah.
But that
But
was literally 4 or 5 years ago.
right. And so
So
how many employees are you at now?
uh, this is the funny part, which is one of the people that helps me out with everything. This woman Marie, that's been a consultant of ours. Meaning, she used to be a client of Hybrids, but she used to be a CEO of this massive energy drink company. Has always helped me with like, just like she's my sounding board and my assistant for like how we develop all the stuff. The one thing she always says is never tell people how many people that work for you, because then they start to gauge how much money you make by the amount of employees you have. It
Oh, interesting.
literally turns them into sale. People turn that information into sales metrics. And I was like, what? She was like, don't tell people.
All
And I'm
right.
like, okay. And it's weird because you don't want to be so private. But I mean, at this point, like it's a full blown staff. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
lot of people. And it's gone very quickly in these last 4 years. We had a thing not too long ago where we talked about that. Like 4 years ago, there was 8 people that worked here, and now it's a lot more than that.
And do you get, I mean, a lot of people describe that sort of concept of like imposter syndrome of, if people knew who I was, they wouldn't want me here or in this. I mean, again, sort of as that skater kid, sometimes do you find yourself as the head of the company, like, how did I get here?
um, yes and no. I think in my mind, I still think that I walk into some of these meetings as like a 22-year-old skater kid, and why are these people listening to me? But at the same time, I've never been lack for like, I know what the fuck I want to do. Whether you agree with it or not, I don't care. And either you're going to say yes or no. But at the same time, when I wake up and I go, oh my God, I'm going to be 49 in a couple months. In a year, I'm going to be 50. Like, am I really a 50-year-old man? Am I that old dude that runs the company? Oh my God. There's that part. I think more that, with, especially for Super 7, while yes, still stuff filters up and I'm the boss or whatever, I try to keep it pretty low key. Like anybody can talk to any, there's nothing, there's a hierarchy, but there's no real hierarchy. Like, you got an idea? Let's talk about it. You don't like something? Let's talk about it. It's not that big of a deal. So I'd like to think that there's not a lot of issue with sort of like, I'm the boss and you need to listen to me. But at the same time, I also know that there are definitely things where I hear from people who are like, nobody wants to make you upset, so they're not bringing you the bad news. Like, oh God, just tell me what's going on, kind of
It's
thing.
it's interesting to me, again, having watched this industry for, it's been more than 15 years, but just with AFI 15 years, as I look at Super 7 and its evolution, uh, really more so than any other toy maker I can think of, you guys are sort of the factory of cool stuff that I always wanted that I didn't know that I wanted.
That's actually something we talk about a lot. I talk about, this sounds really vague, like, how do we make the invisible real? Like,
Right.
it's like, give me the thing that didn't exist. Don't just remake the existing. And then right now there's somebody in the comments going, yeah, but then why are you just making fake Kenner figures? You know, but it's like, what are the thing, the world doesn't need, like, we've been hit up by a million licensors going, what's your, can you make something that can compete with pop? And I'm like, the world doesn't need that. It
Right.
has pop. Like, I'm not interested in making that, but I am interested in making that stuff that I, as a collector, want to have and everything. To your imposter question, I think the imposter thing that I always think about is, when I think about Super 7, I still think it's three guys in the corner just making weird shit and no one's paying attention. And then I'm starting, as we get bigger, it's like, wait a second, like, and more about the rest of the toy industry. I'm like, some of these other companies that I assume are pretty big may not be as big as I thought they were, or are people actually paying attention to what we're doing? I just assume no one's really looking at us and we're just sort of, some weird dudes in the dark corner making stuff. And that, it's like, whatever, they pay their bills, just leave them over there. But it in the last year, it's become more apparent that maybe, to me, a little bit, that maybe we are a little bit more on people's radar than I thought we were. But I still assume that no one knows who we are. No one's ever heard of our toy company, and blah blah blah. But I think at this point, maybe people know who we are,
I
which
think
is,
they do now.
you know
Uh, uh, but,
it's I don't know, it's weird, because then all of a sudden it starts to feel like vanity.
right. Which is okay. I mean, when I think of things like uh, the licensed Halloween buckets, that seems like such low-hanging fruit. It seems impossible. No one has thought of that before. But it's brilliant in its simplicity, and it's
It
so well done.
that's the thing to me. I'm just like, but it's an interesting conundrum, because I'm like, really, for the last 35 years nobody's made anything but a pumpkin? Like, really, people, come on, let's do this. But at the same time, whether it's Spirit Halloween stores or Walmart or Target or any of these people, all of those people are like, yeah, if it's not $4 on shelf, I won't buy it. So
Right,
at the same time, it's like, you can make the coolest product in the world. It doesn't mean you can get a retailer to buy it.
right.
Because almost like, the way you and I probably think about things is like, this is so cool, why don't you get this? And all the retailers look at it more as, if I make a change, I'm having to bet that the thing I already have slotted in here is going to sell worse than your thing. So unless I feel 200% confident that everybody's going to get it, I'm not going to change. I'm just going to keep selling the same thing I've always sold.
Yeah, yeah,
So I'm like, I was like, if you put those things out on shelf at Halloween, like, it should be a no-brainer.
yeah.
Instead, they go, well, I know what my pumpkin's going to sell. Creature from the Black Lagoon is not as universal as a pumpkin. So, and I think it'll sell less than my pumpkin, because I've only got 4 places on a shelf for buckets.
Right.
And for me to take one bucket away, I've got to be confident that you can outsell that bucket. So it's an interesting thing because like the buckets for me, I'm just like, this is such a no-brainer. And we're essentially still only more or less selling them on our site in a few mom and pop shops because big retailers are just like, they're scared of it because it's also more expensive than
Yeah.
the pumpkin that they paid for tooling 35 years ago on.
Right.
So
Yes.
it's an interesting conundrum, but yeah, I think the difference, at least for us still, is while we want to be smart about the business and we're not dumb, it's still driven by like, but is the product good? Like, let's make something cool.
Yeah.
Like, not, hey, diet soda sold really good and Coke sells really good, so we should make Diet Coke. We're not doing that. We're just doing like, oh, we want to make cherry swirls. And they're like, well, nobody knows if cherry swirls are buying or not. I don't know either, but that's what I want to make. Let's
Yeah.
just make it. Maybe there's enough people that like it, and maybe there aren't. And if the product fails, so be it. The product fails.
It's also interesting to me to 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 watch you guys how you navigate and sort of find the interesting ways into licenses. Again, things like Transformers has been done every single way possible, in its 40-year history or whatever.
Yeah.
And then to go, oh, but have you seen this? you know,
Yeah.
and you put them in reaction, and they look, like the animated series, which we've never gotten before.
Yeah, that was one of those things where when we really started talking to Hasbro about Transformers, and to not only Hasbro's credit, but the Transformers team's credit and the people that work with us in licensing, that team in particular was particularly open to new ideas. And that was my first thing, was like, if you have to physically make a Transformer transform, it's very difficult to make it match on screen because you have to hide all the transforming mechanisms in there. 1120. And where if I don't make it transform, which is one of the caveats, the first caveats they tell you when you start working with Transformers is you cannot make it transform. That's
Right.
what Hasbro does. If you want to make Transformers, it cannot transform. So but I was like, how has there never been a true on-screen accurate representation of the cartoon version of Transformers? Obviously, because they existed as toys before they became cartoons. So can we make that? And it's that same thing where there are a very large group of vocal Transformer collectors that are like, it doesn't transform. This is stupid. And it's like, yeah, that's great. There are plenty of transforming Transformers for you to buy. I'm not making this for you then. There's another guy that that's a friend of yours that grew up on Star Wars, that grew up on other stuff, that says, oh my God, you've taken my peanut butter and my chocolate and mixed it together, and now I have a Reese's peanut butter cup of Transformers, and I really like it. And that's the guy I'm making it for. And I think that's part of it too, is like, I'm not trying to sell the stuff I make to everyone.
Right.
Like, it's okay to make something that's just for a small group of people.
That is so lost on so many other toy companies. I feel like, like another example, I could take the idea of, man, I would love to see a Barry Windsor Smith Conan to 200 toy companies, and they would all go, no one's going to buy that. It's never going to happen. And then when you see it on like at Toy Fair, you go, well, I never thought that would exist. I got to have that.
Yeah.
And that just seems like you and your team are just full of that. And it's so exciting to see in in a marketplace that has felt very same-ish for so long.
I think, I'd like to say in some ways that, we're a whole bunch of nerdy collectors getting to make the stuff we want. But when you talk to any of these people, when you talk to Randy from NECA, or you talk to some of the people at Hasbro, you talk to a lot of people, they're all toy collectors too. I think that maybe just their process or their point of view is slightly different. they all make great toys. They wouldn't still be in business if they were making crappy toys. Uh, so I think our point of view is different, which is, to a degree, a lot of the obvious stuff people are already making. I don't need to make that. I don't need to compete with that. If I were to make a really bad analogy, is like, I don't need to make a beige computer. There's beige computers everywhere. We're going to make an iMac. We're going to make it clear with blue. And why? Because it looks cool and it makes me happy when I look at it and it makes me feel good.
Yeah.
And I think for us, a lot of the product is really driven by what resonates with us emotionally first, and then we'll figure out the rest of the business that goes with it afterwards.
Yeah. And that's, that I feel like for, me, because we're the same age, has made this sort of a golden age of toy collecting, because it is the guys like us that are in charge now. Seeing what you guys do, like you said, NECA, they do a lot of amazing stuff, and I think they were sort of uh, the godfathers, the granddaddies of the idea of, well, if you get a license, you don't just have to make the one thing.
Yeah.
You can make flags and shot glasses and speaker cable holders, and just all this different stuff. They've done a great job of that. You think about what the Four Horsemen have done,
Yeah.
just even with their own stuff. So it's amazing to me, as people complain about, well, there's not enough, Hasbro stopped making all the Star Wars figures that I want. They don't make background characters anymore. Like, if people start looking at those next layers of companies kind of beyond what's just on store shelves, there's some really, really exciting stuff being made.
It's a very interesting time because, obviously with the advent of the internet, blah, 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 internet, or all this other stuff where people buy and are comfortable online and seek stuff out online, you have that. I mean, but the reality, as you pointed out, is still 98% of the people that collect toys line up at 8 a.m. to walk into Target to see what they restocked. Uh, Getting that peg at Target, you're not going to get that peg. Hasbro and Mattel and Spin Master, and to a degree McFarlane, like, every one of those pegs represents, over the course of a year, X amount, hundreds to millions of dollars. You're not going to get that peg making the more collector-driven product, which is what's become very interesting about the collector sections that both of them are trying to define.
Right.
At the same time, their company's still driven by bottom line, so you see them heavily influenced by pop and everything. But you're starting to see that turn where they're going, okay, hey, there's a place for the more offbeat things, but you have to have a section of the store that turns faster. You can't replenish that merchandise the same way.
Right.
It's very interesting to see how it evolves and continues to change and what that will be. Yeah, because people are more open to the idea, but the reality is, if you're that guy going, well, I want it to be on shelf at Target, the reality is this stuff isn't going to be, at least in the toy section proper, it's never going to be there.
Right.
That's not realistic because the shelf space is worth so much money. It's like, and I'm not giving away any secrets here. This is the same at Nike or any place else. Like, if you're talking about Star Wars from Hasbro, you can walk into Target and literally go, okay, they have 4 pegs wide by 6, 4 pegs down. They have 16 pegs. That is the amount of space they have for the year.
Mm-hmm.
And how many different characters they can get on that peg is literally the limit of what they can make. If there's a new movie or something else like that, and they need to, or whatever, and they need to put Mandalorian and Baba Yoda and whoever else on there, like, yeah, I realize you want, Yak Face as seen in Empire Strikes Back in his blue costume, but they're not putting that on the peg because the money that SKU will generate compared to just yet another Darth Vader sculpt is so radically different. it's not, there's physically not the room to get it. I understand that you want it, but the mathematics prevent it from being there, especially if you're talking about companies that are worth billions of dollars. Like the amount of, I guess, freedom they have with those SKUs is very, very limited. They will literally say, okay, during the course of the year, I've only got 6 SKUs a year that I can do something fun with.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily because they don't want to, it's where do you sell it and how do you sell it? And that becomes a much bigger conversation. And it's not about what do they want to make. I can guarantee you that there is a guy at Hasbro right now that has a list longer than any of us could ever come up with of all the characters that have never been made in Star Wars and that he wants to get to. But if the buyer at Target doesn't see a place for it, it doesn't matter.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, we're about at an hour here now, and I want to be respectful of your time, but I would absolutely love to continue this conversation with you again.
I feel like you only asked me 3 questions and I just fucking talked and talked and talked about absolutely nothing.
You know, this is what I love. I love how the sausage gets made. That's the whole reason why I started this website.
Yeah.
Is to just to sort of talk about this, and I love it. I would, you know, I would do this 24 hours a day, but you know, my wife wants me to help around the house, so.
Well, you know, you got kids to raise.
That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. No, while there are some secrets, for the most part, there's not a whole lot of secrets here. I think the thing is that when you hear so many people complaining about what's not getting made, I think the reality is it's not for lack that most of these companies don't want to make that. It's just how do you get it into the customer's hands, and are they willing to open their wallets for it? And that's a very different story, because every friend
Yes.
you know tells you, oh, if they made that, I'd totally buy it. Okay, well, they made that. How many? I mean, Unicron. We're going to use Unicron as an example. How many people do you know their entire lives said if they ever made a giant Unicron that totally transformed, I would sell my whole collection to get that.
Yeah.
That was a hard row to hoe to get that thing made.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're doing it, and hats off to them. It's an amazing piece of engineering. It's crazy that they made it. It's awesome. But it was, I think everybody could look at how that went and go like, getting people to actually pay for that, it's a whole different story.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
And you know, I think there was a lot of behind the scenes logistics and hoops that evolved through the sales process, because they weren't getting enough. You know, initially it was just US only, and they had to keep finding ways to open the market wider and wider to let some of those other people that said they would be willing to
Yeah,
be
I
able to
mean,
buy it even.
you know, it's
And
if
I
make
think you went a little through that a little bit with Snake Mountain too. Like,
that was a very dicey, you know, we didn't know. In the end, it worked out great. But I mean, the thing is that I think that the misnomer for so many people is just like, this stuff is easy. If it was easy to make toys, everybody would be making them. And
yeah,
it's not easy. And to your other point earlier that I sidetracked on, though, as a company, though, it is not lost on me that we're sort of, I keep waiting for them to pull out the rug from under us, but that we're living in that weird toy collector fantasy land right now, which is like when you and your friends sit around at home and you go, oh man, wouldn't it be cool if they made this, or wouldn't it be cool if they made that? Right now, we're getting to do that. I keep waiting for the other foot to drop. Like, is this really working?
yeah,
But, you know, as long as they let me try, I'm gonna keep making as much stuff as I can until it just doesn't work anymore.
yep, yep.
So
Well, thank you, because you're doing the Lord's work.
I'm doing somebody's. I don't know. You know, there's plenty of satanic metal bands I'm making too. So there you go.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, yeah. Good point. Well, so if you're willing, let's maybe we can set another appointment in a couple of weeks and talk a little more, because I would like to talk about that sort of aspect of it. You know, you're
Yeah.
making toys for the disenfranchised,
Yeah.
metalheads and things like that. So
Yeah, it's supposed to be fun. So let's have fun. And then, yeah, let's get together. You just let me know what your schedule works, and you can ask me 2 questions and I'll stupidly ramble for 4 hours on a topic that has nothing to do with what you asked me about.
Perfect. Well, all right. We'll end this one here. But thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. I'm glad to hear you and your family are safe and doing well.
Congratulations to you in 15 years. That's
Thank you very
awesome.
much. Thank you so much. So yeah, we'll wrap this one up. We'll put it online for everyone to enjoy and digest, and then we'll find some more time to talk. Thank you to Brian. Thank you to everyone for watching, and we'll have lots more toy goodness, talking toys for 15 years here at actionfigureinsider.com.
Yay!
Thank you.